Hello, and welcome to my first video of 2024. It has been about 4 years since I last posted, and you know what? I have done a lot since then. I went to college and graduated, moved back home, got a big kid job, then moved out into my first solo apartment. I've also been shuffling around the same tiny art desks and DIY studio space for the last 4 years, which has made it really hard to even want to make art, let alone to film anything. Now I finally have some space, so I'm going to talk about how this is going to impact my artistic progress and go over some of the goals that I have for this year. So first of all, I thought I'd start off my first video with my first painting of the year. This is my chance to get back into doing paintings that involve me putting some creative thought into the piece. Lately it's all been commissions of people's pets and whatnot, which is really good, and it made me some cash. But they don't require the same creative muscles that I get to use when I'm creating something basically from scratch. So I started filming after I'd drawn a few boxes on the page, both landscape and portrait for the thumbnails, and I started painting them in a little bit. I learned in one of my college art classes that it's really useful to do a ton of thumbnails and practice paintings because you may think of something that you didn't plan on doing and then fall in love with it. It's also really low stakes and an opportunity to practice. For example, for this piece I was using the wrong brush to paint leaves. I had grabbed an old flat brush and tried to paint leaves and they turned out pretty bad. So I had to look up a quick Pinterest tutorial on how to paint leaves and saw people using a round brush, and I was like, yeah, that works a lot better. I know this is kind of silly as an example, but I normally don't paint flowers with acrylic. I normally do watercolor, but I really did need the refresher. It's also been a long time since I painted with acrylics, so I did need some time to practice. You can also see me writing notes in pencil in my sketchbook about thoughts that I have and like layouts I liked, layouts I didn't like, and tips and tricks for my big painting. And now we go to the actual painting process. I have a very DIY setup here. Please don't mind all of the storage I have laying up against the wall. As I mentioned earlier, I just moved and the only art furniture I have is a very tiny desk and a chair. The lamp off to the left was actually something I stole from home, so I'm lucky to even have enough lighting to be able to see up in the loft. There's no overhead lighting. And the wooden table easel that I'm using doesn't even fit on the table, so I had to like prop it up and shove it up against some things behind it so it wouldn't wobble while I was working. As I'm working, I'm also painting a small practice piece. My original plan was to embroider directly on this canvas because there's a hole in it from being shoved around and moved around a lot, so I wanted to like embroider over the hole and like kind of seal it closed. But once I started painting, I had this fear that I would just tear the canvas once I started embroidering on it. So I grabbed a piece of canvas paper and I put it in an embroidery frame, and I did a rough copy of what I was doing on the canvas onto the practice piece. This came in handy with the embroidery because I learned that any holes I made would be permanent, unlike when I embroidered on fabric and the holes just fill back in if you punch your needle through in the wrong spot. My overall goal for this piece was just to have fun and get warmed up and use up a canvas that's been gathering dust for many years. This piece isn't perfect and it's not going to win any art awards, but it was a good creative exercise for me and I got to try a few new things that I've been meaning to do. It's also one of the first pieces of decor that I made for my apartment this year. That's something I've done in the past, is whatever I'm making, I'll just put it up on the walls and then like that's my decor for the year. I did it in the dorms, I did it in my apartment. I'd make something, put it in a frame and put it up on the wall. So since it's the beginning of the year, it's a perfect time for me to set some art goals. I've already seen quite a few art YouTubers with goals that are really good, and they're focused on growth as an artist and like improving their skills or maybe their social media following. And I feel like A few of mine are a little bit different and maybe a little bit silly, but they're my goals and I'm going to share them here so I have a digital record for myself to fall back on. First, and hopefully most obvious, my goal is to set up my new art studio. In my new apartment, I have a loft area that's perfect for me to finally have an art space. As I mentioned earlier, everything in my past has been shoved into a corner of my bedroom, and I also had to be used for schoolwork and storage and all sorts of things. I was also in the garage at one point with my old art desk. I was in between being at home and being at college, and that was the only place my desk would fit. So you can imagine how relieved I am now that I have an actual room to be creative in. I also had to throw out my old art desk. It was a drafting table that elevated because I took it with me through so many moves that the base was so wobbly that I didn't even trust a cup of coffee to rest on it. So I had to throw that out, and now it's time for me to get a new desk. Another goal for me is to post at least one YouTube video per month. I know that doesn't sound like a lot. There are other artists who post much more frequently than that, but it will more than double my current video count. I have a lot of ideas, but mostly I want a digital record for myself and all the artwork I've done and all the things I'm working on. I also work full-time, so I do have to pick a posting schedule that's reasonable and doable for me without making myself feel too overwhelmed. I don't want this to become a chore. I want it to just be another project that I'm working on. I'm also going to try to do some more sketchbook tours of older or incomplete sketchbooks that I don't want to store anymore, so then I can feel okay about getting rid of them. I really have way too many sketchbooks. When I moved, I went through basically everything, and I still have even forgotten things back home, but I need to clear out my stash a little bit, make some space for the new work that I'm creating. A general goal of mine is also to get back into my sketchbook more often. I love flipping through my sketchbooks, especially when they're full of drawings that I had fun making. I feel like this is also a really common artist goal, but it's really good to remind myself that it's something that I want to do. I've had a really hard time filling in sketchbooks and working through them and making stuff that I actually enjoy. I believe that was partially due to the stress of college and moving and not having good setups, and I would sit down at my desk and instead of being able to draw, I had to write an essay or do homework, and it just kind of conflicted my creative spaces and made me associate them more with homework and studying instead of creating. So now I actually have a dedicated area for that, which I'm really excited about. By the way, this is my dog Mocha. She is a little Chilean girl. She's 3 years old, and she is my roommate. She demands that I buy her the food that she needs and give her constant attention. She is very sweet, and I love her. And she has a bed right next to my desk, actually. And she will most likely be in quite a few videos from here on. Finally, my most important goal is to work through all of the art supplies that I currently have. When I moved, I tried to take as many art supplies with me as I could, and I had found some blank canvases and paper pads and sketchbooks that I hadn't thought of in years. I had so many extra art supplies that I filled up a box with items to donate. And even then, I forgot a few things and I left them at home. So even though I could spend an entire paycheck at Michael's, I am not going to let myself buy anything unless I've used up all the options that I currently have and legitimately need more. Like paint. I do not need more paint. I have 2 full boxes of paint currently. Unless I'm really looking forward to cutting back on the amount of just stuff that I've collected. I think art supplies are my collection hobby, and I need to use what I have before I buy more. So since I've decided to work through my surplus of art supplies, that did start with this painting. The canvas was a given, especially with the hole in it, but then when I went to embroider, I used up some shades that were extras from embroidery kits that I had already finished. This way the painting will also match a few of the pieces that I'm also going to hang up to create a bit of unity and cohesion. I also did that when I was working on the embroidery pieces. So even though the threads were from different kits, they're still consistent in the color schemes. I also chose a few tubes of paint that I grabbed on clearance at Michael's, also impulsively. Again, I do not need more paint. I have plenty, and I'm going to try and work my way through it. I don't need a set of 48 different colors, which I believe I currently have. I also have a collection of cheap acrylics that I need to use up, or I would like to use up. I don't want to store them. Now here we go with the final full reveal of the painting. So it is 18 by 24. I used 3 colors, which are red, yellow, and green, and white, as I was given. You can kind of see from this overhead shot some of the details in the embroidery. It's mostly focused around the outer edges and on the leaves, the borders of the leaves, and little bits around the flowers. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next month. Have a good one.